Which doctor have you called?
Oh, well,
The subject's currently under discussion.
yes, as acting general secretary, I think that, the committee should decide.
The committee? But our actual general secretary is lying in a puddle of indignity. I mean, I think he's saying, get me a doctor now.
No, I don't agree. I think we should wait until we're quartered.
Quartered? The room is only 75% conscious.
Are you wearing pajamas?
Yes, so?
Why?
Because I act, Lavrenti, decisively and with great speed.
I said you'd be tested, and right now you're being tested by a shouting man wearing pajamas. Have you got a nappy under those too? Too late for him.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. This week we are talking about the Death of Stalin.
That we are.
From movies from 2017. This is I had a real pandemic zone about this one because I was sure this movie came out like 2 years ago. And it's actually like 6 years ago this came out. So
yes.
I saw it when it came out. I knew it was a comic, as we discussed last week. I did know it was a comic, but I never read the comic. And then, so I've done this one in reverse order of usual. Like, I watched the movie, then I read the comic, and then I watched the movie again this week.
That's how I've done it, although there was a significant gap of 5 to 6 years.
Yes, that's right. There was a 6 years
between watching the film and reading the comic.
So, it was originally published in 2010 in French.
Right.
So it would have been in album format, which would have been like the large, your Tintin or your Asterix size thing.
Oh, okay.
Of 60 pages, slightly larger than your standard comic book dimensions. By Fabien Nury is the writer, Thierry Robin is the artist, and Lauriane Aurier, am I reading this right? Was the colorist. Translated in 2016 by G. Burnley. And
made into a movie fairly quick, in fairly short order.
I wonder. It was 2010. The French edition came out in 2010.
Of course, I heard you.
Yeah.
I wonder, because the filmmaker is English, I wonder if he read it in French, or did he read it in translation?
I wondered about that too.
Must be been a pretty. He probably read it in French because that's pretty quick. If it was translated in 2016, it's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah. Although, I don't know. It's a mystery.
I did see in the closing credits of the film that the author, whose name you just said, I've already forgotten, was involved, I think, perhaps with the film.
It was a very odd credit. It said screenplay by Fabien Nury, and then the next credit was writers.
Written by,
and then there were 3 writers.
I thought that was very strange.
So it was like maybe he wrote it in French, and then there was like the English version was by these 3 writers, or...
perhaps. But maybe it's a case of, as we've been discussing, where the comic book artist is keen to adapt their comic book into a film, either writing the comic book that they want to be a film, or just being generally enthused about their comic book that they want to make it into a film. I didn't see anything about it online. In fact, to be honest, this week I didn't do a lot of online research regarding the film because I was too busy doing historical research.
I love it. Well, okay, so interesting. You open the book and it says this is a work of fiction.
Yes.
First thing it says, there's a disclaimer right at the beginning on a white page says this is a work of fiction. But essentially it says, but we couldn't make this up.
Well, it did. It sort of hinted at that. It didn't say that exactly.
It says.
Yes, please read it.
Okay. Although inspired by real events, this book is nonetheless a work of fiction. A work of fiction. Artistic license has been used to construct a story from historical evidence that was at best patchy, at times partial, and often contradictory. Having said this, the authors would like to make clear that their imaginations were scarcely stretched in the creation of this story, since it would have been impossible for them to come up with anything half so insane as the real events surrounding Stalin's death.
Yes. I think, I don't know. I feel like they want to have their cake and eat it too there.
Well, I think they do, but I also think it's relevant to this show because if it was just based on a historical record, then it's not based on a comic book. I think we got a movie.
Okay.
We got a movie that's based on a comic book, which is, I think, specifically at least claiming to be fiction, where it's organized in a way that's specific to comic, and the movie follows the organization of the comic.
It absolutely does. You're right. that was a metatextual level that I wasn't ready to approach, actually. But you make a good point.
And it's something we'll get to again, like with, like say, My Friend Dahmer, where if you just make a movie about Jeffrey Dahmer, it's not. I mean, My Friend Dahmer is specifically about this guy that knew Jeffrey Dahmer, and then made a comic about it in high school, or Newman High School. So anyway, okay. So how do we want to get into this? So it starts with it starts in February '53.
Yes.
We've got a classical music performance which is being broadcast over Radio Moscow. In the booth, the director of Radio Moscow gets a phone call, which says to call back in 17 minutes.
Yes.
He's like, okay. He calls back, it's Stalin on the other end of the line. He wants a recording of the performance. So the director freaks out, and he goes down to the booth, and
go on.
He says, are we recording it? No. So people are starting to leave the theater, and he freaks out, and he's like, everybody get back. Everybody back in your seats. They need to do the performance again. This time they need to record it. The pianist refuses because her father and brother or friends or a lot of people she knows have been have disappeared in the terror.
Yes.
Basically. But he pays her, manages to convince her with 20,000 rubles, I think it was, or 30,000 or something like that.
Well, she has to be raised to 20,000. He offers her 10,000 first. I think he offers her.
He offers her
in the comic. I think there are three. There are three figures in the film. Only two.
Yeah. Okay. Then something happens to the conductor, because he can't conduct for whatever. I can't remember what the reason was in the comic, but
I can't either. But in the film, he faints and hits his head on the fire bucket, which is just so funny.
So they have to go, they go to the house of, they find another country. They go to this guy's house, and he's in his
This is handled a lot better in the movie, but yeah.
They bring him back. They do the show again.
Yes.
Okay, so then they have this record. They create a vinyl record of the recording. They hurry it to the what are they? The SKVD?
NKVD. Although they're not called that.
No.
In one of the eras, in the historical eras, they're not called the NKVD anymore at this point.
Okay.
They're called MVB.
I don't even think they called them NKVD in the comic. I think that was only in the movie. But anyway, two songs show up to collect
I should say that, actually, about the comic. The comic tends to be slightly more accurate than the film, especially with titles and labels.
Yeah, that's understandable. We'll get to that, why that is, or how it presents in the comic. So so she slips a note to give to Stalin into the sleeve of the record.
Yep.
And the director tries to protest against this, but the guards take the record and give it to Stalin. Stalin reads, gets the record. He's at home. He reads the note, and then he has some sort of heart attack or stroke or something, and he collapses.
Yes. All right. At what point do I?
Wait a second.
At what point do I start nitpicking?
Wait a second. First, we have to do a pause the podcast.
Oh. All right. Okay.
I'm actually going to say. I'm going to say pause the podcast and go watch that movie. Now, I'm going to spoil that Stalin dies right here in the pause the podcast section, but. I do think, because
you heard it here first, Stalin is dead.
I think we're going to ruin some of the jokes.
Right.
In talking about the movie. So I really suggest people see this movie, and I think it's super funny, but I think we're going to ruin some of those jokes, like guys at the water cooler on Monday morning. So, probably watch it.
I was wondering if we would ever pause the podcast and actually say that people shouldn't watch the film. I mean, should pause the podcast and go and watch the film.
Yeah. No.
I was going to say, why bother? Because everybody knows Stalin's dead anyway. But as you say, could spoil the jokes. I mean, watching this for the second time, I think I laughed even more.
I did. Me too. So the first time I watched this, I was like, oh, this is a really clever satire.
Yeah.
And then I went and I read the comic, and I'm going to spoil this too. I love the comic. Okay. But then I watched the movie again. I was like, oh my God, this is an amazing movie. And I laughed so hard the whole way through it, so I definitely think people should pause it and because I'm also not going to relate the jokes in a way that as funny as the movie.
There's a difference between seeing it once, waiting a while, seeing it again, and being and having the jokes how you say, prefigured in that way.
Yeah.
And they're compared to two guys talking about the jokes.
Yes. We will ruin those jokes.
Okay, so all right, I'll join you. Pause this now and go and watch this film.
Okay. Okay, so jump in with your nitpicking.
All right, so at which point do I start?
Do we want to go through the
At
whole
what point
plot
do I
first?
start doing
Let's go through the plot first, and then we'll backtrack.
No, let me jump in.
Okay.
Please.
All right.
Okay. Unfortunately, this concert story is not true. It didn't happen.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Well, it almost certainly didn't happen.
Okay.
It's based apparently on an anecdote from a book published in the 80s called Testimony, which is an anti-Soviet screed about the life of Shostakovich, the conductor, I think.
Okay.
And even in this... So this is not considered a reliable source. This is going to be like this the whole way through the podcast. I'm sorry, Kumar. And even in the anecdote in the book, it's completely different.
Right.
In that the pianist Maria...
we'll never get the last name.
Udina.
Okay.
Maria Udina. She alone is kept behind to re-record the concert in another location with a smaller orchestra, and she didn't hold out for more money.
Okay.
Instead, she was gifted the money which she donated to her church.
Okay.
And this is all apocryphal anyway because it's published in a book that's not considered reliable.
Right.
So yeah, buckle up for more of these fantastic interjections, Kumar.
Don't you think? And I think it's handled even better in the movie, that you need to exaggerate these stories and include these stories in order to represent in a 2-hour movie or a 120-page comic book what must have felt like or been like to live during the terror. And the thing it reminds me of also is the movie RRR, which came out last year, which I thought... So people were like... I was talking to my mother about it. She's like, the British are so ridiculous in this movie. Like, they're so over-the-top cruel. And I'm like, wait a second. But in my mind, I'm like, you got 2.5 hours to represent British rule in India. Go over the top. Make it as obscene as possible to actually convey the feeling of what it was like to live under that regime to a certain extent.
Yes. Do I agree with Kumar? Keep listening and find out.
Okay. So he has his heart attack. The maid finds him on the floor.
Yep. This is the comic, yep.
Yes,
yep.
In the comic. So Beria is, I think, the first person to find out about it. Minister of Home Affairs.
Because he knows everything. So
yes.
So he's the first to know. He's busy. He's sleeping with. He's having a very unpleasant. Beria is absolutely a comically evil monster in this comic.
Yeah.
Like he looks like a vampire.
So I should.
He's we can say rape. He's raping someone over his desk. Because as soon as he's finished, he tells his guards to arrest their parents.
Yes.
I think. Yeah. And so he gets the call, and he's thrilled to get it because Stalin's collapsed.
Yes. Now I want to mention something about the writing and art here, which is then we get the drive to the compound or something happens here. This, despite being a historical comic, which usually is every panel is packed with details. This guy's doing this. This guy said this, or this is the date. This is actually very leisurely paced in a sense, because you get the drive, you get the establishing shots of the Dasha and him going in and all this. It's always. And, the autopsy of Stalin, which we don't get in the movie, is a full silent page of panels.
There is an autopsy in the movie, but...
Oh, not that one. I'm talking about the embalming is what I meant.
Oh, right, right. Okay.
Yeah, the embalming is not in the movie. So, it's very leisurely paced, and also, kind of going back to what I said earlier, one of the things, also reading this, and one of the reasons I really enjoyed it, is the cartooniness of the art. It's not super cartoony, but it's rubbery and flexible. It's enough to make people expressive.
Sure, and it's not hyper-realistic.
No, not at all.
It's very...
It's extreme expressions and body language and all that kind of stuff that is, I think, suitable if you're going to limit yourself to 120 pages, which is pretty short.
Beric is like a hunchbacked monster in a lot of panels.
Yes, yeah. So, I actually really did like the art in this as well.
I also liked the art.
Yeah. Okay, so Malenkov shows up, who's the deputy general secretary. People are starting to file in now. And we get the way each character is presented is we get. This also goes back to what you're talking about. We get almost like a photo reference drawing of them with a long caption of their full title, which is a huge, ridiculous long.
It's absolutely their correct titles.
Their correct titles, yeah. I totally believe that.
Not given in the film. In the film, they get essentially kind of like a summary of their role in history almost, or their best known role in the Soviet government.
Yes, that's right. And I come across this in translations all the time, especially like samurai fiction or anything like that. You get these titles that don't exist in other languages. They just exist. So you gotta, in a sense, when you translate it, you have to translate into this super long thing to kind of explain what that person is.
Is that kind of like how the Shogun,
they translate as general.
Barbarian expelling generalissimo. I've seen it
something like that. So that you gotta. That's part of that's in the translation, but it's really funny seeing these huge long titles. But it also gives you a sense of what they really look like. It's a grounding
before they have the
feature.
Sort of exaggerated caricatures.
Yeah. Okay, so now they show up and Stalin's on the ground and they have to call a committee meeting to see about a doctor. I love this. This is so funny. They can't call a doctor. They're like standing around like there's certain protocol. You have to have a committee meeting and then before you decide on the doctor. And then all these other characters show up. Khrushchev, Mikoyan, Kaganovich, and Bulganin. And then they so now it's a comedy of errors. So they're trying to decide about a doctor. They've executed all the doctors, which is wild. All the best doctors have been executed in the terror
this is something called the doctor's plot,
right?
Which is one thing the comic and the film both do is sort of conflate the doctor's plot and the terror. The terror happened in the late 30s. It was pretty much over by this point. This is but specifically what happened in 52 to 53 was this event, which was a sort of an anti-Semitic pogrom, where Jewish doctors especially were arrested and tortured and accused of conspiring to assassinate Stalin.
Yes.
And it stems very, very much orchestrated by Stalin himself over a period of years. And it's thought that Molotov's wife, Polina, who we see... Do we see her in the comic? Or is it just in the film?
No, she's definitely... Because they bring her... She's brought out.
In the comic, okay.
In both, yeah.
All right. So it's thought that she might even have been... Her arrest, which occurred 5 years earlier, might have been part of the prefiguring of this anti-Jewish plot.
One of the things I love in this comic is the frequency of the Zionist plot and capitalist paymasters are just an automatic. You can point the finger at anybody and just say capitalist paymaster or Zionist plot, and that's just enough to...
Yeah. Even though the terror was officially over, it's still not a pleasant place to live.
So they bring in this team of totally second-rate doctors, pathetic.
Yes.
And
this is true. Incident. This is quite. Oh god.
Right.
Do I jump in?
Yeah, jump in. Absolutely.
All right. This is true.
Yeah.
The doctors that treated Stalin. Stalin's death is a farce in real life as well, which is why this comic, and especially the film, is so funny.
Yeah.
Because and such great satire. Because his death really was a farce. They really did leave him. He had a stroke, and they left him alone for 12 hours before they called a doctor. That really happened.
Yeah. Right.
And the doctors that came, they weren't the shambolic figures that we get, but they were definite second raters.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Weren't expert. And in fact, this is true. The doctors, the best doctors were in the Lubyanka being tortured.
Yeah.
Right. Interrogated about, hand over your co-conspirators, admit that you were going to poison Stalin, but then at some point between the 1st and 5th of March, the interrogators started asking the doctors slightly different questions.
Okay.
Which were, my uncle has these symptoms.
Yeah.
How would you treat him? And allegedly one of the doctors replied, if you're hoping to inherit from your uncle, it's good news.
Wow, why did they put that in here? That's great.
I know.
Great.
I know.
Well, we do get a great little bit, which is in the comic, but not really in the movie, where they get this respirator in, which is an American respirator, and it doesn't have the right plug, and they have to get a converter, and then they have to get this extension cord, and it's making too much noise, so they have to take it outside, and they're trying to get this super long extension cord for it, and all this stuff. In the movie where they just mention that it's American,
and
everyone freaks out.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good.
So it's a great kind of condensation of a great, really pretty long sequence in the comic where these doctors are running around trying to deal with this American respirator that they brought in.
They brought it in during... Stalin wasn't even alive when they brought it in. It's during, as you said, it's during the autopsy.
Yes. Oh, yes.
They're wheeling it in.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's an American-made one. So funny.
So they notify the press, and then he starts to recover for briefly. And there's a hilarious bit where he's pointing at them all from bed. He's in his bed. He's pointing at all the ministers surrounding his bed, and I think his daughter might be there at this stage too. Mm-hmm. Svetlana.
Yes, Svetlana.
And then they figure he's pointing at the painting on the wall of a lamb being fed from a bottle.
By a shepherd girl. Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's true as well. That really happened.
Yeah, and they're trying to figure out what he means by it. Like, is he?
Yes.
And we'll talk about it in the movie version as well. But it's a couple of panels in the comic.
It's the milk of socialism.
The milk of socialism, yeah. Okay, well, now we get Molotov finally shows up in the comic. He hasn't been around so far because he's on one of the kill lists or the disappear lists.
Is he in the comic, or is that just the film? Okay.
No, yeah, he's
Sorry, I only read the comic once, and it's absolutely become overshadowed by the film in my mind.
So that's why they haven't brought him in to these discussions, is because he's on a kill list. So they're like, well, we can't have Molotov. But the problem is, there's 6 of these dudes. So they need a majority. So now they're like, okay, we got to get Molotov back in here. So each of these 2 factions is trying to control him. Yeah, okay, so... What did I want to say about this? Oh, yeah.
Well, then So where are we at? Have they called the doctors yet?
They called the doctors. They brought the respirator. They've gone through the extension cord.
Stalin's
They
dead.
do the autopsy now. They have to bring in. They have to bring in his son, Vasily.
Yeah.
So that he's got a son and daughter. Svetlana comes in early on. Vasily's a problem. Vasily's in the military. He's just had some. There's been some. Did he crash a plane or something? So
the comic is very divorced from reality with Vasily. I didn't really like the way the comic represented Vasily. So I think he's watching footage of himself crashing an airplane or forcing someone else to crash into...
I can't remember what it is, but he thinks he's awesome.
And also it's utterly debauched when they find him, right?
Oh yeah, he's having an orgy. He's constantly
having an orgy. He's drunk.
Constantly drunk. Yeah. Constantly in orgies. They find him. They bring him in. He sees. He walks into the barn where the autopsy is being conducted, and he assumes these doctors are killing him. His father. They assume they're killing his father, and he machine guns the doctors all to death. Oh yeah. So then they take Stalin's body away, and the army comes out and they call out everyone who's in the house in the dacha, and they're like, okay, you guys will never speak about anything you've seen here to anyone, and then they kill them all anyway, and 2 guys try to escape, 2 witnesses, and they shoot them down.
Yeah.
And that's the end of issue 1.
Yeah.
Right, issue 2, now we get, so now Molotov's wife, Molotovna, is brought back. And he assumed she was dead, but Beria had been kind of keeping her, I guess, as a.
Well, it was Stalin that had her. Yeah, okay. So in the film, it's strongly implied that the sinister Beria has kept her as a bargaining chip.
Yes.
In reality, Beria wasn't actually even in charge of the security forces at this point.
Okay.
Of state security anymore at this point. That had been taken away from him. Palin, as I said, had been arrested years earlier, possibly, ostensibly because she shared state secrets with an Israeli politician.
Okay.
But probably as part of Stalin gearing up against Molotov.
We're talking about the real world.
This is the real world, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So Beria actually wasn't really responsible for that at all. And in real life, Molotov had her released himself.
Yes, right. Okay.
Yes, but of course, in the comic, it's
they bring her back as a way for Beria to win Molotov over to Beria's faction, so he has the 4.
Yes.
So then finally, Marshal Zhukov appears, and this guy wants Vasily done away with because Vasily's an embarrassment to the army.
So odd. That's not at all. Okay, anyway, it's fine. Well, okay, fine, whatever. That's his condition for helping them. He wants.
Yes, he wants Vasily dealt with.
This is all a bit cloak and daggers, I think. I like the film, the way the film handles it better. Zhukov just doesn't like Beria.
Well, yeah.
But he doesn't.
I think it works both ways for me. Again, Zhukov appears right at the time we're doing the cabinet reshuffling, let's call it, where they're like, who's going to take over these roles now that Stalin is dead, and they're moving people around, and Khrushchev is assigned the funeral arrangements.
Yep. That's so funny in the movie.
Yeah, and
if people hear me chuckling, it's because all of this reminds me of scenes from the film.
So we learn about that Svetlana had a lover that was disappeared.
Yes.
And
Alexei Kuplov, I believe his name is.
Was it Yussi? No, was that someone else? Okay, anyway.
I deleted that one from my notes. Alexei Kapler was his name.
Okay. I don't know why I wrote down Yussi. Y-U-S-I. Who was that? Anyway, she gets called to the funeral, and she appears, and they take her photos and stuff, and then she learns it's actually a rehearsal for the funeral. There's something that doesn't happen in the movie, which is a hilarious, crazy bit of business. So, all these trains start... people are pouring in from the countryside.
Yeah.
To come to the funeral. Commoners, peasants are coming in on the trains.
Yep.
And the trains are stopped. I can't remember what the reason was in the comic, but they stop the trains and the crowds pile out and they're like, let us into Moscow, let us in. And the commander in charge of the guards panics. I think somebody throws a can at him or something, and they open fire on the crowd.
Yeah. The Soviet regime doesn't need defending, but this didn't occur. There was no massacre around Stalin's funeral. People were allegedly crushed in the press.
Okay.
Of people. So Khrushchev wrote in his memoirs that 109 people were crushed by other mourners because everyone was just so desperate to see Stalin's corpse.
Okay. I will say something I really did like about... Another thing I really liked about the comic is... you get a sense of the doublethink of the leadership. And you get it in the movie as well, where they're like...
Yep.
They say they believe it out loud. They love Stalin. There's genuine grief, but at the same time, they're like, thank God he's dead. And especially when Polina comes back, there's a great moment in the movie, which we'll get to, where they're talking about how she betrayed the USSR. And then she walks in the door, and they're like, "All the evidence was fabricated."
It turns on a dime.
Yeah.
Yep. and it's like they can't tell what's real or not anymore.
They're totally in double-think zone, except for maybe Beria's.
Well, Beria's the one that he's making them do it. Like he'll say one thing just to get a rise out of him, and Khrushchev says to him, "You're just making this up as you go along, aren't you?"
Yeah. The other thing that happens here that's important is that. Supposedly, all these warrants were signed by Stalin. But one of the first things Beria does in issue, as soon as he hears about the death, he steals the books with all the warrants in them, and it's got everybody's signatures on them. So he's kind of got dirt. Well, I wouldn't call it dirt, but he has... if things start to get more liberal, he's got the proof that they're the ones that signed everybody to death.
Yes.
So
this is necessary. We need this to accelerate the Politburo's hostility to Beria.
Yes.
For his overthrow. So again, like I said, Beria wasn't actually in charge of the security forces, state security at this point. But we need this to get why they feel it. It's like Robespierre giving the speech to the National Assembly or whatever in 1793. Sorry, there's going to be a lot of historical references in this. But he threatened nameless deputies,
right,
who were obstructing the revolution, and that is the impetus that gave them to arrest him and guillotine him. But so Beria's folder of names, as you say, of death warrants with all of the potentate's signatures on them is the thing that frightens them into moving against him.
Yeah. Vasily refuses to leave Moscow. They're trying to get rid of him, but he won't go. He decides to hold a press conference in which he accuses Zhukov of the plot against his father or something like that.
They want to replace his brain with a American brain, or is that the movie? I don't remember.
No, I think that's in the movie. It's really, he has a hilarious rant in the movie, again, against the Zionist conspirators and his brain. They're trying to steal his brain or something.
There's some clueless Chinese communists there. Who's having it being like the translators translating Vasily's rant into the ear of Zhao Enlai or whoever it is.
So a few months later, after the funeral, there's this plot against Beria in which they rig up the office with like an alarm, a sound alarm, in which will summon the army led by Zhukov in, and it ends with the death of Beria.
That's right. Again, that happened. That meeting occurred. Khrushchev denounced Beria at the meeting of the Politburo. Right. Malenkov pressed the button under the desk.
Okay.
The silent buzzer.
Yep.
And they came in and arrested him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's one thing the comic does that the film doesn't, which is maintain something like the original timeline. For Beria's...
yes, because in the movie it's the day after the
funeral. They even say that.
They say that, like the Yorkie one is...
Zhukov says it. Yeah. It's got to be the day after the funeral.
Yeah.
Oh, that's supposed to be a Yorkshire accent.
Well, let that lead us right... Okay, so anything else you want to point out about the historical aspects of the comic or anything like that?
No, because it shares so many elements with the film.
Okay.
But yeah, the comic, I think, on balance is more accurate with things like the titles, as I said, the timeline.
Right. Okay.
It's more accurate with some of those specifics.
What about Vasily coming in and shooting up the barn? Because that plays out very differently in the movie and the comic, although he does come in and he starts shooting.
Well, neither of those things happened in real life.
Okay.
In real life, Vasily was drinking... So Stalin in real life took 4 days to die.
Okay.
In which time he just basically spent on a couch in his dacha. And while doctors looked after him, and while, they gave him oxygen and spoon-fed him tea. And Vasily spent most of that time drunk, wandering in and out of the room, yelling at the doctors to do more to save him.
Right.
But in real life, he was a bit of a pathetic figure in real life, overpromoted, nervous.
Yeah.
And he did become an alcoholic in later life, but he wasn't one at this point.
I see. Okay. Okay, so 2017 we get this movie directed by Scottish satirist Armando Iannucci.
Yep.
Creator of Alan Partridge and The Thick of It.
Yes.
And
perfect
In the Loop.
pedigree.
Yeah.
Perfect pedigree for this movie.
He also in 2019 did the David Copperfield movie, came out with Dev Patel as Dave Copperfield, which is a really great movie.
Right.
I've seen most of it. I only watched about 3 episodes of Veep. Now, the thing is, I really hate politicians. I hate them so much, I even struggle with satire of politicians. So, 3 episodes of Veep was about all I could take. Think of it, I made through a few seasons because I think it was more about the spin, that side of it. So, I was able to handle it a bit more. So what I'll say about the movie is, so, as I said, I watched it once, liked it, thought it was great, read the comic, really loved the comic, came back to this, I was like, this is so great, and I think part of it was, it's everything in the comic, but amped up.
Yeah.
It's more, it's like more jokes, and like the thing with the conductor right out of the gate, even the 17 minutes, there's all this like There's a long conversation about what 17 minutes. Was that 17 minutes from the start of the call
like
or from when I said?
Yeah.
When was that? When did I say 17 minutes?
Open.
All this stuff's happening. Then the conductor faints and knocks himself out
on the fire bucket.
Hitting the fire bucket.
Who put that fire bucket there?
Yes. And even Maria, the pianist, she's the one who says 20,000. He offers her 10. She says 20. Every moment of this movie takes the stuff that was funny in the comic and amps it up.
I do agree.
Into a funnier level.
I think that the comic was fine. More accurate but less clever, I've got written in my notes.
Okay.
Because I think this film is very clever.
Yes.
And, as you say, very funny.
Yeah.
Whereas the comic is much less funny than the movie. I mean, it suffers because
I think the comic relies, it's situational comedy in the comic. Whereas a lot of the movie, like the things we've just talked about, are not situational, they're in the dialogue from the actors. And we should also mention that one of the really great things about this movie is nobody is asked to put on an accent, a Russian accent. Everybody's speaking in there.
There is some putting on of accents.
Well,
very little.
I think
Jason Isaacs puts on a
yes, and
accent.
I have a feeling that Rupert Friend, as Vasily, also probably. I have a hunch that that's not his real accent. Now, I don't know, because I only know him from... Well, I know he was in the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice, and he was in Homeland for several seasons. So he had an American accent in that. So I only know him from those things. So I don't know, but his accent... Well, anyway.
What is his accent?
I don't know.
Remember.
This is the thing.
It's not as notable as... So, yeah, this is...
So everybody's able to deliver naturally...
The accents is so no one. It's not all RP. It's not all American accents.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely not people putting on silly Russian accents.
Yeah.
Instead, it's a bunch
Stalin seems to have like a Cockney.
Yeah, he's Cockney. Yeah. So it's a lot of British. Character actors.
We also have not mentioned that Steve Buscemi is
Steve Buscemi,
who's an all-star from Ghost World, is his second appearance on the show, maybe final appearance.
He's speaking with his native Bostonian accent, or is it?
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Or Eastern United States. As Khrushchev, remarkable. Jason Isaacs is putting on a Yorkshire accent. It's not his native accent, but he said he decided that he wanted to do that because he associates Yorkshire people with toughness,
yes.
And he wanted Jason Isaacs to be a tough guy. He also requested the scar.
Right.
So Zukov didn't have a scar like that in real life, but Jason Isaacs said, "This is a tough guy. I want him to have a scar. Yeah. It's fine because everything's over the top in this. Yeah. Everything's over the top. It's great that people don't really look like the people they're supposed to look like, as well. They don't sound obviously. The director he had an explanation for the accents in one sense that he said, Russia is the Soviet Union is actually a very diverse place.
Okay.
In terms of linguistically diverse.
Yeah, sure.
And in terms of ethnicity as well. Stalin himself was from Georgia and grew up speaking Georgian, learned Russian later in life.
Okay.
Beria also is from Georgia.
Okay.
Khrushchev, maybe Ukrainian.
Okay.
I would Mikoyan is from Armenia.
I would also add that we've got a French comic book that's been translated into English. Why would we put on Russian accents?
I know.
Why would, and also, if they had Russian accents, would be the worst choice of it all because they're all Russian speaking to each other. They would be singing Russian.
So I like this for two reasons. The accents. I like the reason that the director offered, which is that it is a way of showing the linguistic diversity of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
I also like it because it takes us a step away from reality.
Yes.
And we enter into this fanciful
world
of satire. Yeah. I like that. I also like that the actors don't look particularly like the characters they're meant to portray. Obviously, Steve Buscemi doesn't look anything like Nikita. I think he wears a fake belly because Khrushchev's famously fat, very fat. The guy that plays Beria, I suppose, he doesn't really look anything like Beria at all.
They don't even really look like their comic book versions.
No, because the comic book ones are caricatures of the real.
Yes, that's right.
The real people.
Yeah.
No, I like that because in case you haven't guessed by now, historical accuracy is kind of important to me, and we are being told that look, this isn't real.
Yes, right.
Enjoy this as satire, where you don't get hung up on. on reality.
Yeah. Oh, another thing, a thing I wanted to mention about the concert sequence again. So the conductor comes in and they're trying to convince Maria to perform again, and she says, "No, I won't do it because my father and brother were killed."
Yes.
And the director of Radio Moscow, played by Paddy Considine, I don't know what you know him from. He's super familiar, but anyway, he's like, "Well, can we get
lots of stuff, isn't he?"
He said, "I guess so." I looked him up on IMDb. I was like, "I don't recommend."
He was billed kind of highly, I think.
Very high billing.
Considering he's in it for about
2 scenes.
Yep.
So he says to the conductor, "Can we get another pianist in?" And the conductor says, "Even Stalin will be able to tell the difference." And Maria says, "Even?" And he's like, I meant, and he panics. And again, that's a moment of exaggeration that I love because it tells you what it must have been like to watch out even for saying the word even.
Yes, absolutely. And the thought that it might be bugged, because anywhere could be bugged.
Yes, she says this place might be bugged.
And then they jump around the room yelling into the corners.
Yes.
Stalin is amazing!
Yeah. Also, a thing I loved was I had to stop taking notes, but I took a lot during concert because I think it kind of encapsulated all of it. Instead of getting the whole audience back in, they have to bring in, half of them left, so they bring in peasants off the street.
People off the street, yep.
And there's a lady there, like, doing her knitting.
Somebody pickled onions.
Somebody's pickled onions out of a jar. This lady's got a whole jar of pickled onions. And they just have no idea what's going on. They're like, what are we watching? They've been pulled in. And Stalin, when he gets the note from Maria, laughs to death. I don't remember if he laughed in the comic.
He did, same.
He did, okay. So he laughs to death, which is great.
I do like... there's a very funny, I think, black comedy, certainly, but where we have the search for an alternative composer because of the one that passed out, banged his head on the bucket. There's a search for an alternative composer juxtaposed with ongoing arrests that are...
So we're introduced these arrests. The sequence of things are a little bit different from the comic. We have a party scene with all this false camaraderie.
I would love to talk more about the party scene, but you continue yours.
Yeah, so they're all getting drunk. They're telling old war stories, kind of, literally, they're telling old war stories. Stalin invites them to watch a Western, and they're annoyed by this, but they can't really say it out loud, so they have to watch this John Wayne, John Ford Western. So the thing is, they have all these jokes and stuff, and some of them fall flat. So what Khrushchev's strategy is, he goes home to his wife, because he's totally wasted.
Yes.
He tells his wife everything that happened, and she writes it down in a notebook, and the next morning when he's sober, they go over it again, so he knows which jokes were funny and which weren't.
This is true.
That's great, because there's actually a little bit, there's a slight take on it in the comic, where Barry has a notebook of jokes. Right. That he keeps, and he pulls out and he reads, and they're terrible jokes.
Right. No, but this is one of the... I might as well get into this now. This is one of the reasons why I really love the movie.
Yeah.
Because the movie's done its research. There's a lot of... In a way that the comic is more accurate with the broad strokes.
Okay.
I don't want to say broad strokes even, because it's accurate with things like the names of the titles of the potentates and things like the timelines. But it doesn't have what the film has, which I might call Easter eggs.
Right, okay. Okay.
In that, I did, as prep for this podcast, I reread a few chapters of Simon Sebag Montefiore's biography of Stalin called Stalin, Court of the Red Tsar.
Okay.
I read a couple of chapters of that. I had to download it because my copy is currently with one of our faithful listeners.
Okay.
But, and there's, which is very much a biography of Stalin through a discussion of his interpersonal relationships with these people who are characters in the movie: Kaganovich, Molotov, Khrushchev, Mikoyan, people that had been in charge of the Soviet Union for like 2 decades, and they all lived an incredibly kind of close-knit, incestuous lives in the Kremlin. They married one another. It was like a village. And oh my god, where am I going with this? How did I get sidetracked?
We're talking about the accuracy of the movie.
Oh right, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did I start talking about the Easter eggs? No, the Easter eggs. The Easter eggs.
Okay.
The Easter eggs. It's full of little details, and they've they've done their... This is all stuff that I remembered from reading the biography. When I first saw the movie, I walked out of the cinema because I didn't know it was based on a comic book. I walked out of the cinema deciding that it had been based on this biography that I'd read.
Okay.
Which I thought was a recent one, but is actually published 20 years ago.
Okay.
And because it's got little things like the pudding, like at those boozy dinners, towards the end of Stalin's life, Stalin would inflict these dinners on them every night.
Right. Okay.
Every night.
Right.
It was like a living hell for them.
Yep.
They deserved it. But, you know, like, seriously, like, they would be invited to dinner, and then they would watch 2 movies, usually, ending at, like, 2 in the morning. And other, like, you know, Tito from Czechoslovakia would get invited to, from Yugoslavia, sorry, would get invited to these as well. Like, visiting dignitaries would have to go to these dinners, where Stalin would just cruelly force them to eat more than they could... They could stomach, and
you get the sense of that in the movie for sure. Of how miserable they are at this thing. And
Molotov's falling asleep. If you fell asleep, very bad.
Yeah.
You get serious trouble. So you couldn't fall asleep.
Yeah.
You would have to drink and drink and drink. I've got a quote from the book. This hospitality was grossly distorted and represented nothing but power and fear. Sometimes the drinking at these bacchanals was so intense that the potentates, like aging, bloated students, staggered out to vomit, soiled themselves, or simply had to be borne home by their guards.
Whoa.
The standard of drunken horseplay was not much better than a university fraternity house. And do you remember that Beria puts a tomato in Khrushchev's pants?
Yeah.
And squishes it?
Yeah.
That would happen.
Yeah, right.
That's literally something from this biography I read. They used to do it to Mikoyan, though.
Okay.
Although they probably did it to Khrushchev as well. But Mikoyan was Beria's favourite target because Mikoyan was very dapper. He was took special care with his appearance, which is why, you're probably remembering it, Khrushchev says to him as they're lifting Stalin up, Mikoyan says to him, "Are you wearing pyjamas?"
Yeah.
And he says, "Yo, sorry, some of us didn't have time to put on cologne." Because he's
constantly making comments about clothing.
Yeah.
Several times in the movie,
Yeah. So little things like that, the party, the drinking, the tomato. I was just thrilled to see that.
I wonder though.
None of this is in the comic.
No, but I wonder if it was ad-libbed by the actors, and I wonder if those actors did their own research on those real-life personages.
Possible.
And the reason I ask that is because there's a moment where Khrushchev is trying to console Svetlana, and she turns and she says, "Who the hell puts a lamp on a chair?" And to me, and that's it. She never comments it again. Yeah. And I was like, and I laughed at that line, but I was like, did the set dresser put that on this chair, and was that line in the script, or did that actress look at that and go like...
I would actually be curious about how much ad-libbing was in it, because the tone is so earthy and irreverent a lot of the time, which is part of what... They're not talking in some sort of pompous historical dialogue. They use modern invective. I noticed you mentioned that you like the kind of like the Marxist terminology, like the Zionist conspiracies and capitalists. The film has some of that, and it's funny. Like when Molotov's, like in the meeting, the committee meeting where Molotov is talking.
They're always,
their hands go up
liberal
and down.
And radical is another thing that
they kept mixing
Malenkov
up.
keeps trying to remember if it's liberal or
Malenkov's
radical.
very silly. He's the butt of a lot of jokes in this, isn't he? But other than that, the film is you could make a lot of jokes, kind of Marxist jargon jokes in a film like this.
Yes.
And actually the film is quite free of Marxist jargon jokes.
Yes.
Instead, they're using all this invective, all these funny, earthy... Everyone's calling one another assholes, and Steve Buscemi yells at Beria's burning corpse, you know, that you stink, you stupid idiot, you smell, you're burning up and you stink. And it's just... It really... It's funny.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Some of it has to have been... I feel like some of it has to have been...
That's
so
where
sharp.
we're going.
It's so sharp that I think it's written, because like that whole... There's a whole exchange when... So Beria shows up first, of course, just like in the comic. Then Khrushchev is third. I think Malenkov shows up, and then Khrushchev shows up. But Khrushchev has run from home, so he's still in his pajamas under his suit. And there's this whole exchange about him wearing the pajamas. This is before the exchange that you mentioned. But with with Beria commenting on the "Are you wearing pajamas?" This whole thing, it's a really sharp back and forth.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very well written, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a certain amount of ad-libbing because of how colloquial the invective is.
Yes.
Some of the time. But yes, again, it's great. As you say, as you were saying, we're making choices with the storytelling here, having them sprint to be there at Stalin's side. Like, not even... because your life is on the line.
It's funnier when Svetlana shows up. So it works a little bit differently than the comic. And then she shows up, and they're... I don't know why she's
in a massive hurry to
but now we've got two factions are in the woods... peeing or just having secret conversations in two pairs, and they see her and they run at top speed to try to be the ones to like console her.
It's great because we're getting a sense of how cutthroat the politics were,
and everybody's always behind Beria. They're like, we'll bring the church back in. But then, like, this is their plan, but then, like, the church shows up at the funeral, like, the bishops show up, and they're like, who called the bishops? It was Barry. It's always
Molotov is furiously called the bishops, because Molotov, some more truth in television, Molotov, famous, like, old Bolshevik, like, from before the revolution in 1917. So, like, for him, this is deadly serious business.
Yeah.
And, there's some speculation that Beria might not even really have believed in communism.
Right. Yeah.
He's supposed to have said to one of his granddaughters, "You'll study at Oxford one day." But I mean, you could never prove it because it's the nature of what life was like. But,
so
a lot of these other people, they've been there forever, and they are deadly serious about Marxism.
Yes. We haven't mentioned that Malenkov is played by Jeffrey Tambor, and he basically, because he was deputy director, quote unquote, he takes over effectively, at least as a figure, he takes over Stalin's role. So everybody's trying to control him.
Yes,
is effectively what's happening. What else did I have here? So the trains. Oh yeah. So when Vasily shows up, there's a bit about the plane crashes, but there's this hockey game that the team is losing because of the plane crash where all their players have died.
The whole team died in a plane crash.
And they bring him in. He shoots up the barn again. Now, what I really love is, I was like, oh, they've dialed down him killing all the doctors. But then there's this hilarious tussle over a gun. He tries to pull a gun out of an army soldier's holster.
He just keeps trying.
And goes for like a minute. Yeah, a minute, 2 minutes of him. This pathetic struggle of him just trying to yank this thing out, and the guy's holding it in there.
Yep. This is much better than the comic where Vasily, I'm not sure what they're doing with Vasily in the comic. He's having orgies, he's forcing planes to crash into crowds, he's calling press conference, and at the end he's lobotomized in a mental institution or something, or at least heavily sedated.
Yeah.
And I heard they're trying to say that the regime is destructive to Stalin's children, but it's not funny, and it's just too exaggerated to be satire. I found. Whereas, and I mean, in comparison with the film, where Vasily is hilarious.
Yes.
The scene where he runs in ranting and he's ranting, as you say, about the conspirators, and they're using an American ventilator to send capitalist thoughts into his brain, and then they try to subdue him, and he tries to spit. Remember, he tries to spit on the people subduing him,
and he
spits into his own hair.
Yeah.
And then Zhukov comes and shows up and decks him.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
And he makes a great speech at the end about how we're all cubs.
Lithuanian cubs.
He said, my father was a social scientist, but we are not laboratory subjects. We are all cubs. Ukrainian cubs.
Lithuanian cubs. Estonian cubs. And
Georgian cubs.
And then the planes come in and it's cut off.
It's cut off, yeah.
But he
was very drunk trying to write the speech. Actually, he stopped drinking for about 5 minutes, I guess.
So yes, I find him much funnier, and much and you get much better sense that he's of what a pathetic figure, and it's because he's the son of the most powerful man in the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
that it's possible to live up to those expectations.
But there is stuff in here that's really amped up compared to the comic. And one of the moments is when they move Stalin's body away and they clear out the house, like everybody out of the house. They're pulling all the paintings down. They call everybody down. They load everybody into trucks.
Yeah.
The guy that's running the show
gets shot as well.
He says, "Okay, this truck goes off," and then a guy turns to him and shoots him dead. That, I would say that's of the level of Vasily coming in and shooting all the doctors in terms of craziness, but it's such a shocking, hilarious moment.
It's like a little coda at the end of the scene.
Yeah.
So we've been bombarded with the spectacle of the whole dacha being emptied, the doctors all being shot. Allegedly there's a cut scene where the female doctor, Timoshuk, who was the one that rounded up all the sick old doctors, she runs into the minefield that's mentioned earlier and gets blown up.
Right.
That's a deleted scene.
It's in the comic where those two guys run away.
Do they blow up on landmines, do they?
I don't remember how they die. I think they got shot.
But I feel like...
They did say there were mines in there, didn't they? Was that in the comic or the movie?
I know what you say about it being amped up, but I feel like just the way it's shot, because we're in the point of view of the truck.
Yes.
The truck with the prisoners, and it's just they're vanishing off into the distance, and you just see the guy organising it.
I don't think they're that far in the distance, but it is. You just get a second to see it.
Just a second.
You're in the truck leaving.
Yeah. And it's literally...
then you see the guy that ordered you in the truck is getting shot.
It's not the climax of the scene. It's sort of like a coda, a funny little coda. It's certainly not like the big... It's not like a big crashing denouement. Oh, look, the Ouroboros is eating its own tail. No, it's just like... It's just like a funny little ending, yeah.
And they're also arguing about who's going to release the prisoners, because that's another thing that will win the people over to their favor. Like, everyone wants them to be the heroes who the liberal.
They all want to liberalize.
There's an amazing scene where there's a bunch of men lined up against the wall being shot one by one in a row. Then they order a freeze on the executions, and they just suddenly walk away, and the other guys just look down at the dead bodies.
Yeah, there's a row of guys being shot. Yeah. Long live Stalin. Stalin's dead. Malenkov's in charge. Long live Malin. Bang.
Bang.
And then the guy walks up. There's an amnesty. Let's all get out of here. We're going home. Because they're in Siberia or something. Yeah. And then the prisoners are just left standing there.
Yes.
And looking, as you say, looking down at the guy that didn't manage to say long live Malenkov before he got shot. He was literally next.
There's a great thing in the movie which isn't in the comic, which is a long-running thing where Stalin had his photo taken with this little girl. So Malenkov, taking over, wants his photo taken with the little girl. The army goes out to find the girl. It's been years, I guess. They bring back 5 girls that look like her. They're like, we couldn't find the original girl.
Well, that's Khrushchev's idea. And
Malenkov's like, I want the original girl. Yeah. So they send him back. He finds the original girl. She's too tall. He's like, she's grown up. She's like, no. Find me a girl that looks like the girl in the picture. They find a girl. So he goes out on the balcony to wave to the people. And you can't see, you only see the top of her head.
So funny.
My God, it was so great.
So funny.
So an interesting structural thing changed from the comic is that the thing about the documents, the signed warrants, comes in very late. It's almost like the climactic thing. Very near the end of the movie, we're like, we got to get rid of Beria because he's got these warrants.
Yeah, that's what pushes them over the edge. They're trying to convince. There's a funny little farcical scene where Beria's just flipped out because he's under stress. He's just flipped out at them, threatened them all with the documents.
Yeah.
He's like, all of you, I've got documents on all of you.
Yeah.
And he wanders off, and it's like, well, we've got to do something about this because he just threatened all of us. Right, Georgie, they say to Malenkov.
By the way, we haven't mentioned Malenkov's played by Jeffrey Tambor.
You did mention that, but that's
okay.
I did? Yeah.
Okay.
Very funny as the butt of every joke. And, he's like, no, he didn't say me. He was pointing to you. And they said all of us.
Oh, because he was standing over there.
He said, no, all of you. All of you. I was over here.
Yeah.
And then he says, you can kiss my Russian ass.
Yeah.
Malenkov was ethnically Russian, and that's one of the reasons why he became leader after Stalin. But actually Beria was running the show in the months after Stalin's death, but he couldn't serve as chairman of Council of Ministers because he was another Georgian. They didn't want 2 Georgians in a row.
I see. Okay.
Very important fact here.
Yep. so something we didn't mention before is I love the way characters are introduced in this movie. So in the comic we get the panel, which is photo reference in the long title. Here we get a cut, we get the drop to slow motion, and then we get the title and we get their name and a briefer version of what their position is, their cabinet position.
It's more their most famous position that they held in history.
Okay.
As I said, Beria is introduced as head of the NKVD.
Right,
the
that's
NKVD didn't exist at that point, and also Beria wasn't in charge of its
Jason Isaacs, when he comes in as Zukov, has the best of these entrances. I absolutely love it because
he throws off his
and the medals on his chest literally like bounce in the slow mo.
So funny.
It is such a great.
What does a war hero have to do to get some lubrication? He throws off his cloak onto the ground. And his medals bounce.
Yeah.
Yes.
So great.
He's introduced as head of the Soviet army. Are we getting sick of this yet? He absolutely wasn't at this point.
Okay.
He'd actually been recently demoted.
Okay.
Precisely because he was so popular and Stalin tolerated no, alternatives to his own role.
So he was the Leto Atreides of this story.
Ring that bell.
I don't know if my bells are going. Ding, ding,
ding, ding, ding, ding, ding. Stalin didn't trust, and wouldn't, because Stalin was the one that won the war, you see.
Yes,
so he couldn't tolerate anyone sharing in that glory.
We didn't talk, we talked a little bit about Polina earlier, so Polina Molenkova is brought out of prison, and there's that great doublethink scene where before she walks into the room, they're like, she was a traitor and she got what she deserved and she went to jail, and she walks in and they're like, all the evidence was fabricated. So
it is clever. It is. I'm not going to say any more about it.
But I think the comic a little bit got more. Even though it was only a few scenes, I felt like the comic had the devotion of like the maid. The maid loved Stalin so much. The maid that finds him, and the peasants and the people have been brainwashed. They've only got single thing. They believe in him.
Yep.
They've been So I feel like the comic a little bit had that, maybe a little bit more. You don't really get in the movie, you don't really get the desperation of the people to enter Moscow. I mean, they do, and they get fired on. We're told that 1,500 of them are killed.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get because we don't get like the longer scenes with them trying to get into the city and all that kind of stuff and taking the train and that's about all my notes on it because I had to stop because I was taking too many notes.
Yeah, I mean we've already gone over the basic plot, haven't we? Which the film shares.
Yeah.
There's still.
Well, it actually ends with the concert, another concert, which is a nice coda.
Yeah. Khrushchev is watching the concert, and behind him is Brezhnev, who's
looking, staring down at him. Yeah.
Yes, an image you remember as you're leaving the. But yeah, there's have we had enough of historical inaccuracies yet? I don't understand. One thing I didn't like, and another nitpick. I don't like Khrushchev. I guess is our protagonist. I suppose.
Beria, it's interesting because Beria in this, you said he was cartoony in the comic. I wouldn't use the word cartoony, but he is a real, like you really get him as a sex predator in this more than
in the comic.
He's constantly talking about it,
and
you're seeing it like he's getting young girls pulled in off the streets. And
it does
stuff.
egg the pudding a little heavily, I suppose.
I don't know.
Very much.
I don't know if it's heavy. I think it's. It's a way of. You can draw him like a cartoony Frankenstein villain.
Yep.
Or you can put all this stuff in the movie so we get a sense of who he is.
One of the things I want to talk about why I love this film so much in a little bit. And one of the reasons I think is the way Beria is presented in the film. I really do like it. He very much was a terrible predator of women and rapist. It's impossible to differentiate between the people that he just straight up raped and the people that, sort of were compelled to sleep with him because they were trying to get their husbands or their parents or whoever out of detention, or he would drive around Moscow and have his bodyguards just pick up women.
That's what seems to happen in this.
Yeah, and he would have them. Yeah, and it's shown in the film. And he would have them taken back to his apartment, where he would ply them with drink. Eat dinner with them, ply them with drink, and then essentially force himself on them. And there's no way they can refuse.
Yeah.
Some did. And then what would happen is, later on, after the deed had been performed, they would be met at the door by a guard with a bunch of flowers, which is in the film.
Okay, yeah, right.
It's in the film,
yes.
like outside his gate.
Yes,
it's another thrilling Easter egg. So, and if you by taking the flowers, it's kind of like that's like the fig leaf on the act that's just occurred.
Yep.
If you've taken the flowers, then you've consented.
Yes, right.
And but not everyone did, and famously one person didn't. One woman didn't. There's a story that's often told about Beria that he tried to rape this woman. She wouldn't have any of it. She just left. The guard was waiting there with the flowers, tried to give them to her, and Beria is alleged to have snapped. It's not a bouquet, it's a wreath.
Right.
And she was arrested the next day.
Right. Played by Simon Russell Beale, who I don't know.
I'd have never heard of him, but he's fantastic in this.
Really remarkable. Oh, we should mention Michael Palin is Molotov.
He is, yeah. He is. It's fine. It's great. I love it. This is like a who's who of some great British character actors in this movie, and not just British, but American as well, with Jeffrey Tambor and Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
I was going to say about Khrushchev, at the ending with, they kind of soften Khrushchev a bit. Especially with him, he's like the only sane man sometimes, and he sends Svetlana away. An odd gesture because Svetlana didn't leave. Svetlana famously defected.
Right, okay.
Svetlana Stalin defected to America, made a living there as a... she wrote her memoirs, made a living there as like a writer, and eventually died in Great Britain, I think only in the last 10 years.
Okay.
But she lived in Moscow for years after Stalin died, working as a translator.
Right.
And I think only defected in like 1967.
Okay.
And it's just, to me, like, it's a strange choice to put that in, and it feels like they put it in...
Oh, to make Khrushchev...
a bit more relatable, or also to give a happy
because
ending.
Because all these guys are crazy. And I've been wanting to do this episode for a while, since the anniversary of the Ukraine war. I was like, oh, we should do this, and then it kind of slipped past, and then the visit to Crimea, which happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we should do it, and then it kind of slipped past. And none of them are redeemable, but I guess you have to make a movie out of it.
Yeah.
And
I think you could have just left it out. Like,
maybe
they could have all just... I mean, they're all just... Yeah, I don't understand why they put that in. So, a small problem with an otherwise pretty fantastic movie. But yes, why do I like this film? As you can probably tell, watching films about historical events with me is an utter chore, because I'm like this the whole way through. But I liked this film a lot, and as you said, it's just what... You absolutely nailed it at the start of the podcast, Kumar, when you said that it's about the idea... It's about the
what
themes.
It felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is pure satire. It's hilarious, for one.
Yeah.
And we get such a strong sense of several things. The fear, the constant fear, and the second guessing, the double
paranoia.
think, and the utter paranoia, which extended up to everyone. You know, even the people at the very, very top of the system.
Yes,
the magnates
Malenkov,
themselves.
who takes over, is being tested by Beria all the time with his little tiny words that he says and things
Another thing I loved about it, it shows the, as I was mentioning before, the very close relationship among the way it was run, almost like a family of these oligarchs who ran the Soviet Union for so many years. Just how much in one another's business they were, how they bickered.
Yeah.
Beria's the way Beria is shown, so great.
Yeah.
A figure that I don't think many people know about Beria these days. I think more people know about Yezhov, who was the poisoned dwarf, as he was called. Okay. He oversaw the terror, actually.
Right.
And then was replaced by Beria. But Beria, a deeply sinister figure.
Yeah.
And this film absolutely does credit to the way he should be remembered, which is that as a monster, but also a ruthless and most clever man, and the funniest of them all, because he was famous for his wit, which he would inflict on them all the time.
So that little joke book that he wrote...
Not a good representation.
Okay,
he was very witty and famous for absolute barbed jibes at the expense of the other magnates.
Okay.
At those boozy dinners that I told you about, Stalin, even though he didn't even like Beria, would make him in Georgia it's called tamada, which is toastmaster. So he would have to sit next to Stalin, and he would be in charge of forcing everybody to do the drinking.
Right. Okay.
And he never ever let them off.
Okay.
And the farce of Stalin's death.
Yep.
Because in real life it was a farce.
Yep.
They play with the details a bit. Of course, he took many days to die. He had a stroke. He had it in the evening, not the morning. But they really did leave him for 12 hours before they called a doctor. They went in. I think Beria was one of the last to find out that Stalin had collapsed. Unlike this film, where he's the first to show what a sinister to show what a sinister spy master he is. In real life, he was one of the last to know because none of them trusted him, but yet he was one of the first to go in because they wanted him to take the blame if something went wrong. But he went in. He went in with maybe Malenkov or Khrushchev. I don't remember which. And they see Stalin sleeping on the couch where they'd moved, his bodyguards had moved him to, and they said, "What's this all about? Why are you alarming us? You know, Stalin's just sleeping. We're leaving." Mm-hmm. They leave and waited 12 hours before they did anything. And I've got a quote from Montefiore here. The magnates surely discussed whether or not to call doctors. It was extraordinary that they did not call a doctor for 12 hours, but it was an extraordinary situation. This is usually used as evidence that they deliberately left him without medical help in order to kill him. But in their fragile situation, in a court already bristling with spy mania against the killer doctors, it was not just hyperbole to fear causing panic. Stalin's own doctor was being tortured at that moment merely for saying he should rest. If Stalin awoke feeling groggy, he would have regarded the very act of calling doctors as an attempt to seize power.
Wow.
And yet, the four, who were Beria, Khrushchev, Malenkov, and Kaganovich, had these hours to divide power. The decision to do nothing suited everybody.
Wow.
Yeah. So So, for those reasons, I love the film. Now, how are we going for time?
Scrap all day.
Very good. Now, I was going to talk a bit about whether films should represent the past accurately or not. But I feel like
Wait a second. The question is, should the film represent the comic?
That's it. See,
in this podcast.
Yes. You absolutely cut me off at the knees there by pointing that out at the very start. So is this... Okay, so my question, I suppose, instead of all this stuff I wrote out, I suppose my question instead is this film adapting reality or is it adapting the comic? Adapting history or adapting the comic?
And because I think if it was adapting reality, it would not be...
History, sorry, not reality, sorry.
Sorry, if it's adapting history, they could give it a different title, and they wouldn't say based on the comic book by Fabien Nury in the end credits. And they could go off one of those books that you mentioned rather than going off the comic book or doing their own research or something, and I don't think that's what it is. I think Iannucci read a comic that he thought was really funny and that was in his wheelhouse that matched his sensibilities, and he could see the movie in it, and that's the movie he made, and reordered and changed the timeline of it, all those things to make it into a fun farce.
I agree up to a point.
Okay.
I do agree. I agree up to a point, but there's so much about this film where if you have a passing familiarity with Soviet history, you get like a lot more out of it.
Okay. Oh, more. Oh, well, I would say...
Well, I don't know about more out of it, but there's a lot of fun moments where if you know about the tomatoes in the pockets and the bouquet. So I agree to you up to a point, but I also think some of the things that I really love about it is its strength as a satire and the way it showed, as you pointed out, those themes, those senses, the vibe of the time, and it does it effectively, despite making any number of historical inaccuracies. I have a tremendous list of historical inaccuracies, which I won't go into because I feel like I've gone into most of them already.
It's interesting because we're actually kind of coming at this from opposite ends because except for that history report I wrote in grade 9 or 10 or something.
You're not a history guy.
No, and not a history guy, definitely Russian. I was certainly interested in Russian history for that moment because I chose that subject to write on at the time. Mostly because I was interested in communism more than Russia. But, yeah, so I had none of that coming in. I just had this is a work of fiction. And knowing the way movies work and just knowing that it wouldn't be accurate was my only entry point.
And I feel like I would be a lot better company if I also accepted that, you know, like, films like this are fiction. But, I mean, you know, I think if you just set out to make art when you make a film... Because, I like, films about history... or historical drama, especially drama about real events. Like, if you set out to make something, like make a satire or make an artistic movie that says something new, or if you have to deviate from history, make that deviation mean something. Make it illustrate, as you said, like illustrate a moment or a phenomena, a moral point, or raise a question with it. You know, don't just make Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah.
All right, cool. I've said my bit.
Okay.
I've said my part.
Well, I think we can do our ratings, I guess. So, well, we know the movie is yay for both of us.
Oh, we're going out of order. Yep, okay. Movie is...
So let's just say the movie's yay.
Movie is yay, 100% yay.
Comic for me is a big yay. Actually, I was really surprised how much I enjoyed it.
For me, the comic is a nay, because...
Nay? Okay.
Look, I could probably say yay, but look, if you had to choose between the comic or the film, I'm going to say the film.
Of course, but
okay.
It's never a choice between the two. Right. One has to be nay.
That's never been the way we've done this.
But I will say, I have regretted saying nay to Monkey Bone since last week.
Okay,
I said nay to the comic and the movie, and I've regretted both of those.
Well, you can't take it back.
No, I can't. It's in stone now, and 100 years from now, and people are listening to this, they'll be like, well, he said that last week, so that's what it is.
Right.
So...
All right, but I'm going to say nay for the comic, and I think that's just personal preference. I just didn't find it super clever. The themes came through less strongly. I think you just don't bother.
I would say people should track it down. I think it's a good read. Okay, where are we going with adaptation? I'm going to say big yay
Fantastic.
For me. I think it's
brilliant adaptation. This is everything an adaptation should be. The changes are all great. The details added are all fantastic.
Yes.
It's a very good adaptation, both of a comic and of history itself, Kumar.
Okay, excellent. All right, we'll leave it there. So, all right, let's talk about next week. So next week we're going to do Diabolique from 1968.
We're going back in time.
Yep, directed by Mario Bava. Now, I will say this about I think it might be called... No, there's a Danger Diabolique. That might be the newer... Anyway, the comic is hard to find.
Okay.
Now, here's what I'll say about it. So, it's an Italian comic, and only 2 issues were ever translated into... 2 or 3 were translated in English. They're very hard to find. But there's a website. There's a Diabolique website out there.
Great.
Where you can buy PDFs of all of the... Like, hundreds of them, I think.
Are they in English or Italian?
English.
That's bizarre.
Now, the thing about it is, I don't know how official this website is, because you can also buy... There are some stories where Diabolique doesn't get the money at the end. He's not successful. You can buy alternate versions with alternate endings where he gets the money or he gets the girl or whatever. So I don't know how official this website, or if it's just fan translations or what the deal is, but I did pay a couple of bucks and I got the first couple of issues, which are quite long. They're more than album length. They're 100 pages or something.
Oh, great.
Or something. So I don't know how much of that.
Well, it's probably going to be easier reading than 5 or 6 chapters of Court of the Red Tsar.
Yeah, I don't know what this translation's like though, so it might be really, who knows. Anyway, that's for next week.
Fantastic.